The cold, unforgiving wind whipped across the barren hillside, rattling the camouflaged cover over Captain Eric Mason's position. Through the scope of his sniper rifle, he focused on the distant cluster of Imperial troops, their shiny armor gleaming in the fading light. His breath steady, Mason adjusted his aim, waiting for the moment when arrogance would give way to chaos. "Do they even know what's coming?" His spotter's voice crackled softly through his earpiece, a low whisper barely audible over the howl of the wind. "They're about to find out," Mason replied, his voice calm, controlled. He exhaled slowly, his finger brushing the trigger. Below, the Galactic Empire's forces moved with a precision that spoke of their confidence. Advanced energy shields hummed around their officers, a nearly impenetrable barrier to any energy-based weapons, exactly what the Empire had assumed Earth would use. Mason had other plans. A bead of sweat trickled down his brow, but he ignored it. His focus was absolute. Through the crosshairs, he picked out the lead officer, Commander Arvox, standing tall in his command armor, issuing orders as if Earth's resistance was nothing more than a mild inconvenience. Arvox laughed, mocking the primitive humans and their outdated weapons. The commander never saw it coming. Mason squeezed the trigger. The sound of the shot was swallowed by the wind, and in an instant, the ultra-dense round left the barrel, cutting through the air at impossible speed. A heartbeat later, the bullet collided with the shimmering energy shield around Arvox, and for a split second, the shield flared, then shattered. Commander Arvox's body jerked as the bullet pierced through his helmet, and he collapsed in a lifeless heap, the blood pooling at his feet. Silence gripped the Empire's forces. Mason watched the chaos ripple through the ranks below. Officers scrambled, barking orders, their faces twisted in disbelief. The invincible energy shields, designed to repel anything their advanced enemies could throw at them, had just been undone by a single, kinetic bullet. They hadn't accounted for the raw, unrelenting force of a simple projectile. "Confirmed hit," Mason said quietly, more to himself than to his spotter. His eyes remained fixed on the panic unfolding below. "They're freaking out down there," his spotter said, voice tinged with amusement. "Did you see their faces? They don't have a clue what just happened." But Mason wasn't laughing. He knew this was just the beginning. The Galactic Empire had mocked Earth's ballistic weapons for years, considering them relics of a bygone era. In their arrogance, they had never prepared for something as primitive as a sniper's bullet to be their undoing. "They'll adapt," Mason said. "They always do." "Yeah, but they didn't expect this." As if on cue, the Empire's soldiers moved into action, scanning the surrounding terrain for the source of the shot. High-speed drones zipped through the air, equipped with sensors designed to pick up any trace of heat, movement, or sound. They would be on Mason's location within minutes if he didn't relocate. "They're sending drones," his spotter warned, already packing up the gear. Mason's mind worked quickly, calculating his next move. He had only a narrow window before the drones pinpointed their position. Without a word, he slung his rifle over his shoulder and began to retreat from the sniper nest. The spotter followed, the crunch of gravel beneath their boots barely audible over the whine of the drones closing in. As they moved, Mason's thoughts raced. Every shot he took was planned, part of a larger strategy to dismantle the Empire's command structure. But this operation wasn't just about thinning out their ranks. There was something deeper at play, something the Empire couldn't see coming. His custom-built rifle wasn't just lethal, it was part of a covert Earth initiative decades in the making. The bullets weren't ordinary either. They carried with them an unseen payload, nanobots, engineered to infiltrate and disable enemy systems from within. With every shot Mason fired, these nanobots embedded themselves in the armor, weapons, and communication systems of their targets. Soon, the Empire's forces would begin to malfunction from the inside out, though they would have no idea why. A sharp crackle of static interrupted his thoughts. "Eric, they've locked onto us," his spotter said, his voice tense now. "We need to move faster." Mason's heart rate quickened, but his face remained impassive. "Keep heading to the secondary point. I'll cover you." They split off, with Mason taking position behind a large outcropping of rock. He watched as the drones approached, weaving through the air with alarming speed. He steadied his rifle, his breath slow and measured. If he could take out just one drone, it might buy them enough time to reach their next vantage point undetected. He lined up his shot and fired. The drone exploded in a shower of sparks, but even before it hit the ground, Mason knew the others would be on him in seconds. He turned and sprinted through the uneven terrain, his boots kicking up dust as he moved with practiced efficiency. His rifle felt heavy on his back, but years of training kept him focused, pushing forward even as the sound of the drones grew louder behind him. They were closing in. Mason slid behind another rock formation, his chest heaving as he pressed his back against the cold stone. The drones were just overhead now, scanning the ground. His mind raced, calculating the odds. Could he make it to the extraction point in time? Was there another way out? The whine of the drones grew deafening. Then, suddenly, a blast erupted nearby, sending a shockwave through the air. Mason ducked instinctively, but as he raised his head, he saw something that made his blood run cold. An entire Imperial strike team had landed, elite soldiers, trained for one purpose: to hunt and eliminate threats like him. Mason's jaw clenched. There was no way out now. He raised his rifle, his finger hovering over the trigger, ready to make his final stand. The Imperial soldiers closed in. And then, without warning, his earpiece crackled to life with a voice he hadn't heard in years. "Eric, stand down. This is not your fight anymore." Mason froze, his fingers still on the trigger. His heart pounded in his chest as he recognized the voice. It was someone he thought was long dead. Mason's breath hitched, his body frozen behind the rock as the voice crackled through his earpiece. He hadn't heard it in over a decade, not since the covert operations went dark, not since he was left for dead on a mission that cost him everything. Eric, stand down. This is not your fight anymore. His heart hammered in his chest as his mind raced. It can't be, but the voice was unmistakable. It belonged to Major Lang, his former commanding officer, the one who disappeared without a trace. Mason tightened his grip on the rifle, feeling the weight of the weapon press against him like the weight of the past suddenly crashing down. "Lang? How are you?" Mason's voice was low, strained, but before he could finish, the sound of footsteps echoed around the rocks. The Imperial strike team was closing in fast, their boots crunching against the gravel, their armor glinting in the last rays of the sun. The tension coiled in his muscles, the trained instinct to fight back, to survive, kicking in. Yet that voice, Lang had disarmed him more than any enemy ever could. "Listen to me, Eric." The voice crackled again, calm yet commanding. "This situation is far more complicated than you realize. You need to pull out now." Pull out? Mason's mind rejected the idea instantly. For years he had prepared for this moment: the Empire's arrival, the sniper's perch, the meticulously engineered bullets. And now he was being told to walk away? He couldn't leave, not after everything he had done, not after everything he had lost. "They're almost on me," Mason whispered, half to himself. His eyes darted over the terrain, calculating his next move. There was a narrow gap between two rocks he could use to make a break for it, but the Imperial strike team was fanning out, spreading like a net. They were trained for precision and execution, and they were hunting him. His finger hovered over the trigger. He could take one out, maybe two, before they closed in. It would give him enough time to escape, but Lang's voice continued, cutting through the noise of the approaching soldiers. "I know what you're thinking, Eric. But if you pull that trigger, you're burning a bridge you can't rebuild." Mason gritted his teeth. "You don't get to tell me how to do my job, Lang. Not after you disappeared and left us to clean up the mess." His voice was cold, carrying years of bitterness. Silence followed, the only sound being the distant hum of the Empire's energy shields in the background. Then, finally, Lang spoke again, softer this time. "You think I wanted that? You think I left by choice?" Mason's heartbeat pounded in his ears, his mind flashing back to that mission, the one that went south, the one that ended with his team scattered, dead, or missing. He had been left alone to fend for himself, and he had spent every day since preparing for this moment. "There's more at stake here than you realize," Lang continued, his voice urgent now. "This isn't just about Earth. If you fire that rifle, you'll be starting something that won't end until we're all buried under rubble. You need to trust me." Trust. Mason scoffed internally. Trust had been shattered the day Lang vanished, leaving him and the others to fend for themselves. Yet here he was, caught between the approach of Imperial soldiers and the voice of a ghost telling him to stand down. His pulse quickened, but beneath the fury, there was a gnawing sense of curiosity. What didn't he know? The first Imperial soldier came into view, his heavy footsteps slow and deliberate, sweeping his scanner over the rocks. Mason could hear the faint click and whir of the equipment, picking up traces of heat signatures. Another soldier appeared behind him, their formation tight and well practiced. One wrong move, one sound, and they'd close in like predators. "Eric, don't do this," Lang urged again, his voice low. "There's more at play here than just a simple invasion. The Empire knows about the nanobots." Mason's eyes narrowed, his fingers still hovering over the trigger. The nanobots had been his ace in the hole, his hidden weapon. If the Empire knew. His earpiece crackled again, this time with a new voice, a familiar one. His spotter. "Mason, you've got less than a minute before they're on you. What's the call?" Mason's breath came in sharp, shallow bursts. He was running out of time. The Imperial soldiers were moving closer, their scanners sweeping dangerously near his position. His grip tightened on the rifle, the weight of the decision pressing down on him like a physical force. He could still take the shot, still fulfill the mission. But Lang's voice, the hidden truth behind his words, had burrowed into Mason's mind. He had always been a soldier, a sniper trained to kill from the shadows. But now, he felt like a pawn in a much larger game, one where he didn't understand all the rules. The first Imperial soldier raised his weapon, pointing it directly toward the cluster of rocks where Mason crouched. His muscles coiled, every instinct screaming at him to pull the trigger, to take the shot and run. But then the voice returned, one last time, full of authority. "Stand down, Mason. If you trust me, if you ever trusted me, don't take the shot." Mason's hand trembled on the trigger. His mind whirled, replaying Lang's words, his gut instinct warring with the cold logic of a sniper's training. Trust had never come easy for him, and after everything that had happened, he wasn't sure if he could trust anyone, especially not a ghost from his past. The Imperial soldier took another step closer, his weapon trained directly on Mason's position. The tension built to a breaking point, the cold metal of the rifle's trigger pressing against his finger like a final choice he was about to make. His breathing slowed, his pulse pounded in his ears. Time seemed to stretch in the final moments. Then, against every instinct, every fiber of his being, Mason let go of the trigger. He pulled back from the rifle, sinking lower behind the rock, his body rigid as the Imperial soldiers passed mere feet away. His chest heaved with the effort of restraint, his mind racing with questions. The soldiers moved on, unaware that their target had been right in front of them. As they disappeared over the ridge, Mason's earpiece crackled one last time. "You did the right thing," Lang said, his voice both relieved and ominous. "Now meet me at the extraction point. We've got bigger problems." Mason's jaw clenched, his body coiled with tension. The old ghost was back, and with him came a storm he wasn't sure he was ready for. The sound of distant gunfire erupted from the Imperial forces' direction, and Mason turned, his instincts screaming that whatever lay ahead was only going to get worse. The echoes of gunfire reverberated across the ridge, sending a fresh wave of tension through Mason's body. His muscles tensed as he crouched behind the jagged rocks, every nerve on high alert. The Imperial forces weren't retreating, they were advancing, their heavy boots crunching over the loose gravel with precision and purpose. "They're pushing forward." His spotter's voice came through the earpiece, laced with a hint of panic. "What do you want to do?" Mason's mind raced. He had expected the Empire to fall back after losing several key officers, but they were pressing in harder. He scanned the terrain below, eyes locking onto the advancing soldiers. Something wasn't adding up. This was no routine assault. They were hunting for something, no someone. Get to the extraction point, Mason said, his voice low and urgent. I'll cover from here. There was a brief hesitation on the other end. Mason, if you don't move now, you're going to be cut off. I know, Mason muttered, adjusting his rifle. His spotter was right, but he couldn't leave yet. Not with the Imperial strike team closing in. Something had shifted since Lang's voice came through his earpiece, and Mason wasn't about to let that go unanswered. Through the scope, Mason caught a glimpse of an officer among the Imperial troops, a tall, imposing figure in sleek, dark armor. His face was hidden behind a tactical helmet, but Mason knew who it was. Lieutenant Calthor, one of the Empire's elite. Calthor was known for one thing: finding and eliminating high-value targets. If he was here, Mason's mission had just become a whole lot more dangerous. He's here, Mason whispered to himself, his heart hammering in his chest. Who's here? His spotter asked. Calthor. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. Everyone in the field knew about Calthor's reputation. He didn't just kill, he dismantled, piece by piece, until there was nothing left of his target. Mason could feel the weight of the situation intensify. Calthor wasn't here by chance. He was leading this hunt personally, which meant Mason's position wasn't as secret as he had hoped. Mason's finger hovered over the trigger, contemplating taking the shot. One bullet could end Calthor's hunt right here, but it would also give away his position. His mind churned, torn between the mission and survival. A sniper's job was to remain unseen, but the temptation of ending Calthor's threat right now gnawed at him. Mason! His spotter's voice pulled him out of the internal debate. We're running out of time. If they reach the extraction point before us, we're finished. Mason lowered the rifle, exhaling slowly. I know. Without another word, he slung the rifle over his shoulder and started moving, keeping low and silent as he weaved through the rocky outcroppings. The sound of footsteps grew louder behind him, the unmistakable rhythm of Calthor's team closing in. Every step Mason took felt like the edge of a blade, one wrong move and it would all be over. As he moved through the rocks, his mind churned over Lang's sudden reappearance. Why now? Why after all these years? Lang had vanished without a trace, presumed dead, yet here he was, issuing commands as if nothing had changed. Mason couldn't shake the feeling that Lang's presence was tied directly to Calthor's pursuit. Was Lang part of the Empire now? Had he switched sides? A sharp crack echoed across the ridge, followed by a burst of sparks as a laser blast struck the rocks just inches from Mason's head. He hit the ground hard, rolling into cover as more shots rang out. The Empire had found him. Contact! Mason hissed into the earpiece, crawling through the dirt as the barrage of fire continued. His spotter's voice crackled in response, but the connection was breaking up. Cut off, hold on! Static filled the line, cutting off any further communication. Mason gritted his teeth, gripping his rifle tight as he pushed forward, keeping low to the ground. The rocks around him shattered under the relentless fire, sending fragments of stone flying in every direction. He needed to think fast. The extraction point was still a few hundred meters away, but with the Empire's forces closing in, it felt like an impossible distance. He peered over the ridge, spotting the telltale shimmer of an Imperial shield generator nearby. That's why they hadn't retreated. They were securing the area, preparing for something larger. His mind snapped to Lang's warning, "There's more at play than you realize, Star." Mason's heart pounded as realization hit him. This wasn't just an invasion. The Empire was setting up something critical, and the shield generator was a key part of it. He had to act fast. He moved, sprinting from cover to cover as the gunfire intensified. The shield generator came into view, its massive structure humming with power. Mason could see Imperial engineers working on it, unaware of his presence. If he could disable it, he might be able to buy enough time to get to the extraction point, and maybe disrupt whatever the Empire was planning. His hand tightened around the rifle. There was no time for hesitation. He took aim, steadying his breath, and fired. The bullet soared through the air, striking the generator's control panel with a deafening crack. Sparks flew as the machine shuddered, the hum of the shield faltering. But Mason wasn't out of danger yet. The Empire's forces immediately shifted their attention, the sound of shouting officers filling the air. Calthor was among them, barking orders. Mason didn't have time to relish the damage he'd caused. He sprinted toward the extraction point, his legs burning with the effort. The terrain was unforgiving, every step feeling like a battle against the elements. The air around him crackled with energy as the shield generator fully powered down, leaving a gap in the Empire's defenses. But as Mason neared the ridge leading to the extraction point, a chilling sight stopped him in his tracks. Standing at the edge of the cliff, silhouetted against the sky, was a figure he hadn't expected to see. Lang. His former commanding officer, alive and standing there as if the last decade hadn't passed. Mason's heart skipped a beat, his mind struggling to reconcile the ghost from his past with the man in front of him. Eric. Lang's voice was calm, measured. I told you this wasn't your fight anymore. Mason's breath hitched as he stared at the man who had once been his mentor. What the hell is going on, Lang? Lang didn't answer immediately. His eyes scanned the horizon, watching as the Empire's forces regrouped. Then, with a grim expression, he looked back at Mason. You've stepped into something far bigger than a simple invasion, Lang said, his voice filled with a strange mixture of regret and urgency. And now you're out of time. Before Mason could respond, the ground beneath him trembled. The sky above darkened, and the unmistakable roar of engines filled the air. Mason turned, eyes widening as he saw it, an Imperial dreadnought descending from the clouds, its shadow casting an ominous pall over the battlefield. We need to move now, Lang said, his voice firm. Before that thing wipes us all out. But Mason couldn't move. His mind raced, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. How could Lang have known all this? What had he been hiding all these years? And why was the Empire willing to unleash such devastating force? The answers were out of reach, and as the dreadnought loomed closer, Mason realized one thing: this battle was far from over. The crackle of energy shields hummed in the air, a constant reminder of the Galactic Empire's technological dominance. Captain Eric Mason lay still, pressed into the jagged ground, hidden beneath the cover of an outcropping. His breath was slow, measured. Through the scope of his custom-built sniper rifle, he watched the Empire's forces descend onto Earth's soil like vultures claiming a carcass. But Earth wasn't dead yet. The cold wind tugged at his gear, but Mason remained steady, his eye fixed on a singular figure, Commander Arvox's star. The Imperial commander strutted through the ranks of soldiers like a conquering hero, his shimmering energy shield flaring with each arrogant step. Arvox was the kind of man who had never faced defeat, and it showed in his posture, in the way he casually barked orders. Mason's finger hovered over the trigger. He knew the mission. Take out Arvox, destabilize the Empire's control, and throw the invading forces into chaos. But this wasn't just about one shot. This was about years of preparation, of lying in wait for the right moment. He had trained for this. His bullets weren't ordinary. They were engineered to carry tiny payloads of nanobots capable of infiltrating and sabotaging Imperial systems. Winds picking up, came the low whisper of his spotter through the earpiece. Mason didn't respond. His focus was singular, absolute. The Empire thought they were untouchable, that their energy shields made them invincible. They were wrong. Mason's sniper rifle wasn't designed for energy blasts or plasma rounds. It was a relic of Earth's ballistic past, firing dense, high-velocity rounds that could punch through nearly anything, including Imperial arrogance. He adjusted his aim slightly, calculating the wind speed, the angle, and the distance. Commander Arvox came into perfect focus, his smug face visible through the translucent shimmer of his shield. Taking the shot, Mason muttered, his voice devoid of emotion. He pulled the trigger. The rifle bucked gently against his shoulder, the sound of the shot swallowed by the wind. The bullet sliced through the air, invisible to the naked eye, before striking the shimmering shield. For a brief second, the shield flared, bright and defiant. And then it shattered. The round passed through effortlessly, tearing into Arvox's helmet and burying itself in his skull. His body crumpled instantly, collapsing into a lifeless heap. For a moment there was silence, a stunned disbelief rippling through the ranks of the Empire's forces. Then chaos erupted. Mason watched through the scope as officers scrambled, shouting orders, their faces twisted in shock. He didn't move, didn't blink. The nanobots embedded in the bullet were already at work, spreading through the Imperial systems, infecting communications and wreaking havoc on their advanced tech. "They're panicking," his spotter said, amusement creeping into his voice. "They didn't see that coming." Mason allowed himself a small, grim smile. The Empire had underestimated them, underestimated Earth. For all their technological superiority, they had forgotten the raw, relentless power of a sniper's bullet. "Confirmed kill," Mason said, pulling back from the scope and sliding into the shadows. He could hear the Imperial forces shouting, their panic palpable even from this distance. The drones would be coming soon, scanning for heat signatures, movement, anything that could pinpoint his location. Mason had anticipated that. He'd been preparing for this moment for years, ever since the Empire first started eyeing Earth like a prize to be claimed. "We need to move," Mason said quietly, already packing up his rifle. "Drones inbound." His spotter grunted in agreement, and together they began their retreat, moving through the rocky terrain like ghosts, leaving no trace of their presence. The Empire might have the advantage in technology, but Mason had something they didn't: patience. He had spent years preparing, perfecting his craft. He knew every inch of this landscape, every ridge, every crevice. And he knew how to disappear. The wind howled around them as they moved deeper into the shadows, the sound of Imperial soldiers growing distant behind them. But Mason's mind was already elsewhere. This mission wasn't just about Arvox. That was just the first move in a much larger game. There were other targets, other commanders, and Mason was going to take them down one by one. As they reached the next vantage point, Mason paused, glancing up at the sky. The Empire's ships loomed above, their shadows casting a dark pall over the land. The invasion had only just begun, but Earth wasn't going to fall without a fight. Not while he was still breathing. He crouched down, setting up his rifle again, this time aiming at the distant outlines of the Empire's forward command base. He could already see the next officer, a high-ranking lieutenant, moving through the camp, completely unaware of the threat looming over him. But before Mason could steady his aim, a sharp crackle filled his earpiece. "Mason, stand down!" The voice was calm, authoritative. Major Langstar. Mason's heart skipped a beat. He hadn't heard that voice in over a decade, not since the mission that had nearly cost him his life. Lang had vanished without a trace, presumed dead. And now here he was, issuing commands as if nothing had changed. "Lang?" Mason's voice was tight, his grip on the rifle tightening. "What the hell?" "Listen to me, Eric." Lang cut him off, his tone firm. "You're walking into something bigger than you realize. This isn't your fight anymore." Mason's jaw clenched. His mind whirled, caught between the mission and the sudden appearance of a ghost from his past. "You left us, Lang. You don't get to tell me what to do." Lang's voice crackled with urgency. "Eric, if you fire that next shot, you'll be starting something you can't stop. Pull back now, before it's too late." Mason's heart raced as he glanced through the scope again. The Empire's forces were regaining their composure, their officers regrouping. He could take another one out, disrupt their chain of command even further. But Lang's voice echoed in his ear, a warning he couldn't ignore. Before he could respond, the sky above darkened. Mason's blood ran cold as he looked up, his stomach sinking. A massive Imperial dreadnought was descending from the clouds, its shadow casting an ominous blanket over the battlefield. This wasn't just an invasion. This was a full-scale occupation. "Mason, get out of there!" Lang's voice came through again, sharper now. "That dreadnought will wipe you off the map." Mason's grip on the rifle tightened. He was trapped, caught between an old ally's warning and the pressing weight of the Empire's overwhelming force. The dreadnought loomed closer, and Mason knew he had only seconds to decide: stay and finish the mission, or retreat and face whatever truth Lang had kept hidden for all these years. The choice hung in the air, heavy with the weight of consequences, as the first blast from the dreadnought lit up the sky.